As we begin today, I want to acknowledge that I am located in Lloydminster on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. Before the arrival of the explorers and settlers, many First Nations traveled through and thrived in this area, which also includes the homeland of the Métis. I was born here, but I chose to return here as an adult. And now, after unlearning what I was taught in public school in the 1970s and 1980s, and relearning a less whitewashed history of this place, I see this land and its stories through very different eyes. I acknowledge that the roots of my family on the prairies came at the cost of the First Nations people who were here long before. Their land was taken so that my ancestors could farm and build their lives in this place that became known as Canada. I cannot change the past, but I can try to move forward in a good way by sharing what I've learned about the Indigenous peoples whose teachings are so intricately tied to this land and all it encompasses. Welcome to Ancient Indian Secrets and Other Matters of Consequence, Part 2. A century ago, Wes's ancestor Old Fine Day sat with a young American anthropologist eager to capture the memories of the old ways before they were forgotten. Now, here we are, over 100 years later, using the magic of video and audio to revisit some of those stories and record new ones. This has felt like the perfect medium to capture the words, intonation, laughter, and tears of this amazing storyteller. I am honored to have been the listener on this journey. Thank you for joining us. Muy estás? Mr. Fine Day is sharing stories as he knows and has experienced them, which may differ from those told within other Indigenous communities and settler institutions. Throughout the series, we discuss various plants and traditional healing methods. This is not intended to replace medical advice from trained healthcare providers. Some episodes contain graphic descriptions of events witnessed and experienced by the guest at his time in residential school and at various points throughout his life. They may spark memories and questions, so we are asked to listen with open hearts and minds. Viewer discretion is advised.
So today, when I was coming, I was thinking about all of these things and what do people need to hear? They need to hear where we have arrived. They need to know where we are at. And they need to know that this is a time when it's critical. We make decisions and choices about moving forward in a positive way and becoming what it is we are meant to become after this physical life. But also to understand that this earth will survive. And there will be people. I mean, what comes to mind is that there will be a mass migration of spirits to me. And it's not because, we think we're in charge. We think we're at the highest levels as humans when we're more closest to the bottom in the scheme of things. And, your body has value. Your emotions have value. Your thoughts have value. And your spirit has value in other dimensions. And so your soul can become part of the spiritual economy of a spiritual reality. And it can become a positive force or it can become a negative force. Again, that's up to us, each of us. And that's the same with your emotions. They can become your doorway to freedom or they can become your doorway to a prison, depending on how much effort you put into improving and enhancing the quality of your life. It will never be perfect, but it will never be hopeless either. You are always given opportunities, challenges to help you elevate the level from where you are to become something even greater and more powerful, to become a child of Creator, you see, and to understand that that is a powerful thing. And you know, on my first fast, the eastern doorway to my lodge opened, and a herd of horses stood there. And this is a story I've never told. My first experience with my vision. And I looked, I heard, I looked, I saw them. Yellow horse, bay horse, black horse, and a white horse. And when I looked, they came out of their doorway and they galloped until they got to the southern doorway, which is where I was facing. And then they came galloping towards me. And I remembered a story I had heard about how one of our great chiefs had also gone fasting in the mountains seeking vision, and how the horses came to him. And he had been told, if they approach, if they come close, you have to demonstrate your fearlessness, your faith, the power of your faith. And whatever they do, do not show weakness. Do not show fear. And so when those horses came galloping, and they were led by a big black stallion, he had fire in his eyes. And you could see the clouds billowing from his nostrils. And the old chief said, I remembered what I had been told, and when they came galloping towards me, I sat in stillness. But then when I realized they were going to run over me, he said, just involuntarily my hand went up, my arm, to protect myself. And that was the moment everything disappeared. All the horses vanished. The cave I was sitting in vanished. I was alone in my fasting lodge. And later, I learned that all of those the herd of horses I had seen milling around me, those could have all been my horses if I had not demonstrated fear, if I had not given in to my fear, if I had held on to the faith that they would not harm me and sat in stillness, I could have been a rich man in horses. But because I became afraid, I've never been well off when it comes to horses. Sometimes I'll have 2, 3, maybe 4, but that's the most I ever had. And I think back and think if I had been able to show them my faith, how different things might have been. And I remembered that when they came for me. And I sat and let them approach. And then they spoke to me. And they taught me a song. Because of what you have done here, you have earned our compassion. And you have earned the right to call upon us whenever you need our help. And if you should ever find yourself in a situation where you need our help, whether it's to heal someone, or to teach someone, or to help them, this is a song we want you to remember. And the instant you begin to sing this song, we'll all be right there around you, supporting you, helping you, coming in response to your call. Osawa Stim led the way. The buckskin. He had a black stripe on his back. And he said, I am your grandson. He said to me. And this is a song, a power song you have to remember. And I was given a lodge. I was taught the ceremony. I was taught the songs, the prayers. And for the longest time, my altar sat outside my lodge until they told me, now you can bring it in the lodge. You no longer have to have your altar outside. Now it can sit beside you at the head of the lodge. And people think these things, I tell these things now because people have become so fixated on facts and they lose the magic, the power, the beauty, the colors, the lights. And before it all goes into the vacuum, I want to grab it and anchor it here somewhere. In your heart, in your mind, in your body, and in your soul. Because you will have young ones that will need this too. And so will I. They'll end up coming to you and saying, did you know my ancestor? Was he funny? What do they say about him? What do you remember about him? And my wish is that whatever it is that gets left behind be something that is powerful, that's empowering, and that will lift up their faith, their hope, their dreams, and help them see the spirits and connect to the spirits. But understand too that you have to make an effort. You have to walk out and meet the spirits. Go sit in the bush. Put your back against a tree. Put your hands on the grass. Stick your feet in the dirt. Let the mother nourish you. Let her children heal you. That is what I wish. If something could come out of my life, that it would be that. Good things for the young ones. Good things for my children and their children. And with that, I open myself places that no one has ever been allowed to see. So you can have a glimpse and pass it on when the time comes.
You have taught me to not just listen with my ears, but with my whole self. And that's where the tears, it's in my heart and my mind, my body, and my soul. And thank you. Thank you for sharing at that level.
The other day when Alana phoned me, she's talking about her situation, and I start telling her stories. And I don't hear anything from her end of the phone. And I would stop and say, hello, are you still there? Yes, she said, I'm listening. Well, when we are sharing experiences, stories, knowledge, understanding, I told her, if you ever sit in a group of people, you'll hear the stories being told, but then there will always be someone in the circle who will acknowledge that they have heard, and they will, ka. But that acknowledgement, and I don't hear that from your end, I said, so, it makes me think I'm speaking to myself, and if that's what I'm doing, then I don't need a phone for that. Ka, she said. There, you got it. So every now and again, when there's a lull in the conversation, just acknowledge that you've heard and say, or ka, or tapwe, if you agree or understand. But otherwise, then it comes to a stop if there's only one of us. I've heard all my stories, I know my stories.
Well, my tears are my acknowledgement. Right? But that's what I said. It is a physical experience. Right? Listening is a physical experience.
Yeah.
And is that just because you are a powerful storyteller?
Well, also it says something about your listening ability, your ability to listen and what do you hear, and how deep does it go, your listening. And even in our stories, in our stories of our crossing and our arrival here, how we were told, the things we were told would greet us on our arrival at this place. But the journey, how it would take, when I think about it and I think about the original woman, the original berry-picking woman who came across with her son, her youngest son, she was over 500 years old when she died. And she had been journeying all her life on this pilgrimage, going from one part of the continent to the other, where she ended up, which was beside a great body of water that you could not drink without getting sick. It was too salty. But there were animals there. There were fish that swam around, and sometimes they would come up and bark like dogs. And the hunters hunted those and took their hides and made boats and clothes out of them. But they made boats, and they used those boats to cross that land, because where they had arrived when the fog lifted, they saw this body of water, but on the other side of that body of water they could see mountains. And that was where they had to go. And that old woman had told her son that before she died. She had, in fact, given him a bowl carved out of wood. And she had taken the hair off her head and she had put it in the water in that bowl and then covered it up with a fish skin and tied it up with some rawhide string. And every morning, she told him, after she dies, every morning open that bowl. And if there ever comes a time when you open that bowl and that hair stands up, prepare yourself. Because there is going to be incredible things happening that will require all of your faith, all of your strength to see through, to make it through. And they camped on the edge of the body of water for a long time, for generations, and lived well off the things that lived in the water. And one day that young man, that old man, when they had started the journey, he had been the youngest medicine man in their community. And all the old ones had died out, and he was now the oldest one. And he was in charge of the safety of the community. And one day they say that he untied that fish skin and took it off the bowl when that hair stood up in that water. And when that hair stood up in that water, he felt a great fear. He was terrified because he knew something was going to happen that was beyond anyone's power. And that was after they had crossed towards the foothills of the mountains. And they were going into the mountains in a valley. You know, the camp split up. Some didn't want to leave the ocean because it was good living there. But there was one, he was instructed to follow this valley until it ended. And so he had taken half of the camp into this valley until they came, and it stopped. And they camped there and hunted and trapped and lived there for a time. But, you know, when that hair stood up, at that time he told the people there, everybody has to lie on the ground, face down. Put your hands over your eyes and do not look up. Do not look up until the shaking stops. And so the people all laid down on the ground and covered their faces and eyes. And it began to rain. And then the thunders came. And the thunders were the old ones. When they opened their eyes and when the thunder spoke, the earth trembled. The earth shook. And while that was happening and they were lying down with their face down, that old medicine man said that he could hear rocks cracking. And I have heard the spirit of stone when it cracked as it speaks. I heard the spirit of stone speaking, and I could hear when it broke, each piece that broke, I could hear the sounds it made. But after a time, there was thunder and lightning and the earthquakes and the splitting mountains. And after a time, all of that stopped and everything calmed down. And that medicine man lifted up his head and looked around. And where they had been, he could not recognize it. The valley didn't end. And in fact, the place that they were going towards, where the valley had been blocked, it had been split open by the thunders. And he was told that he had to journey through that pass. And that would take generations. But eventually they would come upon a new garden. This is the place that they would raise their descendants. Their children's children would grow up in this environment. And when they came out of the mountains, they would see flat prairies. And on these prairies, there was two great rivers that flowed from the mountains and through the land. And they were to travel out onto those prairies, and that was to become their new home. This is where their descendants would live in the future. You know, one woman, when they were making that crossing, they were told, don't look back. And she looked back, and she turned into stone. And they say for generations that woman in stone stood, looking back where they had come from, but immobile, stuck in place, and just as a stone, and the figure of a woman looking back. And so they had to leave her behind. And when they came to this new home, new prairies, you know, they began to spread out into different little bands and communities. Because this was a new land that was full of promise. It had berries, it had game, it had medicines, all of the things that a human could need was there before you in this new garden. And we just had to learn about it. And they were told, you know, that there will be ones there to teach you. Masqua, the bear. He will be there. Watch him. When he gets hungry, look at him, because he'll go and find some food. And what he uses for food, watch what berries it picks and watch which ones it leaves behind. Because in the future, that's going to be your food. And the ones that it didn't touch, you don't touch those either, because they can be dangerous. And when it begins to feel ill, watch it. And when it goes off to seek the medicines that it needs to regain its health, watch which medicines it takes. You know, and we have things we call minuek in Cree, but in English they're referred to as bear root. Yeah. They go close to the surface. But I mean, that was one of the gifts of the bear. The gift of that bear root as a medicine. That story is such a, you know, I think about the creation story, and that's a long story, and this one is just as long, of the journey to our new home. And the generations of people that made it. And they were all guided by spirits. And even now, you know, I think about, for instance, Whitefish Reserve in Saskatchewan. The original chief came from the north and east, and he was given directions to travel during the spring and summer when they built canoes. And every night he would dream about landmarks he would see on their journey the next day. And he would be instructed when it was time to camp. this is where they should camp, and he would be shown that. And the last dream he had was when he arrived at Whitefish Lake, and those spirits left and said, "This is your new home. This is where your descendants will grow up, will raise their own children, and your community." And that old man, I believe one of his descendants was net maker. But I mean, these were all dreamers and visionaries who were the leaders in the old days. And now we have to try and awaken that in these new leaders. It's the ability to dream and the power of visions, and how they can take you to where you need to be at the time you need to be there, because you have a meeting or an interaction with spirits waiting at that time and place. And it was not written down. You know, my great-grandfather told these stories to settlers, to traders. He would often share some of these stories with them. And they would leave with bits and pieces of the story. But so it would not be forgotten, eh?
So he told stories to white people, to the settlers and the traders. And you've chosen to tell stories to me, a white woman, but I've also been told these stories aren't meant for white people. And you shouldn't be telling white people these stories.
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, how so many of our things have been appropriated. And, like, you know, our children are taken, but they didn't send us theirs. They took our land, and they created prisons for us, you know. They promised us schools, but they created these brainwashing centers, you know. And now, for me, I think that people have to learn what it is. They actually have to have a different vision of what has transpired here in this time and place. And, you know, like I say, when the spirits say if they come, welcome them. And there have not been many. And some of them came, but they wanted proof. Well, you tell these stories, but where are they written down, you know? They're written down in my heart and in my mind and in my soul and in my body. That's where they're written down. And no, I didn't take a pencil and put them in paper. I just remembered to keep my integrity intact so that I would remember the stories as they were passed. You know, and writing it down would not make it more true or untrue, you know. You can have things that are written down that are full of lies, you know, as we've discovered. Yeah. Do not have the ring of truth in their telling or in their reading. You know, there is a depth of understanding that resonates with what I refer to as the ring of truth. And that ring of truth, it's a vibration, and it will affect your soul. It will affect your heart. It will touch your mind, and it will shake your body. the power of sound and the sounds of power. These ones you'll have to put into some kind of order. I have not tried to keep them in order. But they are bits and pieces of stories, glimpses into different times, through our human experience. And we were always part of the natural order. And we are still part of the natural order. But we don't behave like we are anymore. You see? Yeah. Where is your mind? Where is your soul? Where is your heart? Where is your body? And who are your friends? When you see your friends, do you say hello to them? Do you recognize the birds when they call you? Or the fox that sits beside the road as you pass by and says you're not traveling alone. Do you hear that? When they say we travel with you. And how can you help people to see that and feel it and hear it and understand it, dream it, and not feel like there's something wrong with them? Yeah. I better get my head examined. I'm seeing things.
But it's taking that leap of faith that you are a child of Creator and you are worthy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Creator will never put anything before you that you do not have the capacity to handle. And if you can't handle it, well, it's not Creator's fault. Yeah. It just means you have to try another tact. A different little way to understand and internalize, interpret, and then set free. Because you all have stories. You all have power. You all have dreams. And those dreams will lead you to your visions. These are the things that you will not find written anywhere. You will find them written on the walls of caves in the spiritual dimension. But before you are able to get there, if you are able to journey interdimensionally, you have to take that red paint with you. And every spiritual doorway you pass through, you take that red paint and put it on your hand and make a hand print on the wall of the entrance. And they say that the medicine people in the future will know, the ones who were able to make it to the spiritual dimensions, because their handprints are there. And there are not many handprints. They require a person of great depth and faith and humility to be allowed into those doorways. One medicine man that my grandmother traveled with to go into a doorway, she was taken in, but he was not. And the spirit said that he was not yet deemed to be worthy to enter. And so he had to stand outside and look in that doorway where my grandmother was being taken. And she said, once I got into that hill, I looked and there was 9 lodges. And in front of each lodge there was a entity that looked like a human. It had a human body, but it had a cougar head. Pisu Stigwanak, the cougar-headed humans. And Pisu is related to, you could say, the passion can affect you physically, and so you have to learn about that, how to protect yourself from that.
So you've chosen to share these stories and have them recorded, and some people would say we shouldn't record stories like this.
Well, you would say, well, don't listen to them, If you don't have the capacity to be in the presence of powerful, sacred stories, and, don't put yourself in that situation, because it could be very damaging to you. But if you're open-minded, if you have faith, if you believe in Creator, if you have come to know your spirit helpers, these are stories that you will welcome, because they are stories of the Spirit. And those are the stories that will never go away. And like the wind said, "Kakike, kakike, niga mpapimasin, pugite, kisikok. Forever, I will be blowing through all levels of creation. There is no end. There is only change." And we will be many things before we're done. Right now we're humans, And if we do our job right, well, we'll be able to move on. If we require some touching up, we'll be back. And if we don't have any understanding or any beliefs or any desire, any ambition, then we will be stuck in the darkness. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Out of the fog. Yeah, you never know what will come out of the fog, but you know it will be powerful.
It was a powerful day.
Because that's how the thunders travel, through that fog, through that water. And it will impact you upon you emotionally in depths that you never imagined it might. And so when you hear these things, then you sit and you reflect, you remember, you open yourself, you find the courage. You might have little tests that you will experience to help you to learn to develop the discipline where you're not startled, you're not shocked, because those can traumatize you spiritually and emotionally. That great fear. And that can keep you from a whole different level of understanding. It's like that old-time chief. He was a great man, and still, when that black stallion came, and he said it's out of its eyes there were flames, and out of its nostrils there were clouds of steam that, as he came galloping. Powerful, powerful legs here. And I thought, if he hits me with one of those, I'm done. But I tried to sit still. But when it was about to run into me, he said I could not help it. I could not restrain my body anymore. My arm flew up. And when my arm flew up, everything disappeared. I was no longer in a cave in the mountains. I was sitting in my lodge on the prairies. And the things that might have been if I had been a fearless warrior. It could have been much different. And, you know, these stories we say, is it appropriate? When I went to the city, Winnipeg, young people are starving. Starving. You know, I tell these stories and you could see women. They were about to burst into tears. And, like, nobody's ever talked about these things to us. And who are you? I come from a long line of medicine people, the rememberers. And it was my job to remember these things. It was my destiny to sit and share these things so that others could benefit. And just who I am and what I do. And I do it at Creator's urging. I don't do it to be politically correct or to be as an intellectual exercise. You know, I'm not trying to convert anybody. I mean, your life is your life, and you can do with it what you like, but I too have a life, and this is the story of my life. And if it helps you, wonderful, you know, take what you need out of there, but always give back something. Share it with someone who needs it, you know.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you to Mr. Fine for his time and stories. Special thanks to the Lloydminster Public School Division Prairie Thunder Boys Drum Group for providing the music for our podcast. We also want to acknowledge Lakeland College for the use of space and equipment, as well as TELUS STORYHIVE for their support.